For TigerDetails.com, Jerit Roser here with Julie Boudwin, trying to look at the start of this impressive LSU 2021 class and a couple of big names still out there that, Julie, you've had a chance to write a lot about, and Korey Foreman and Maason Smith, and obviously you've worked a ton with Maason Smith throughout his high school career and now exploding recruitment. I guess, first of all, shout out happy birthday to Coach Ed Orgeron. This is a well-timed video for that. But how are you?
I'm good. Happy birthday to Coach O. I think I saw he is the big 5'9", so happy birthday to him.
A big, I guess, day and show for that Bayou area of the state. Birthday for O and you hailing from down there, and obviously Maason, now one of the biggest fish remaining for this 2021 LSU class. And you just had a piece Friday looking at his relationship with a guy from across the country that they now consider each other best friends, and a lot's been made of that story and that relationship. Take me a little bit through that, kind of the background of their friendship and how you got a good sense of it and the conversations that they have about one another, their relationship, their game, and ultimately some of their college plans.
Yeah, for starters, so Maason and Korey met last summer at the opening in Texas. They spent 4 days together, and they really bonded over the fact that they were the two youngest D linemen there. They kind of were the outcasts, underdogs, which is weird considering they're both still highly ranked now. But yeah, they really just bonded over being kind of overlooked last year at that particular event. They spent 4 days together, like I said, and to this day, it's the only in-person time they've spent together. After that, they kept in touch. Then Korey obviously committed to Clemson. They didn't talk quite as much then. Maason does not have an offer from Clemson, nor is he really interested in Clemson from what I've gathered. But then Korey decommitted earlier this year, and that's when their friendship really kind of blossomed even more. LSU had stayed in contact, from what I've gathered, with Korey even during his commitment to Clemson, and then after the decommitment, it really started picking up again. So yeah, Maason and Korey, like, I guess, what is today? Late July, just over a year that they've been friends. And it was Korey that said Maason is one of his best friends, and he hopes that Maason considers him to be, that good of a friend as well.
Their games, I mean, you look at Maason as being the top-ranked player in Louisiana, Korey top nationally, that both, I mean, highest regarded at their positions nationally, just elite prospects. What stands out about them? And I guess more so than that, how big of an impact would either, let alone both, potentially make to this class that's already coming together so well in that front seven?
They're both very unique prospects. Both very quick off the line. Their speed, especially for Maason. I mean, he's 6'5", 300 pounds. When you're able to watch, it's one thing when you watch it on film, you watch it in a game, but I've been to so many of his training sessions now. When you see that kind of speed up close, it's really eye-opening, because you don't see that from every prospect. You don't see that from some skill guys that you see, let alone a 300-pound lineman. Korey, on the other hand, he's got a lot of unique skills. He's been compared, I've read some national analysts compare him to Chase Young. So, I mean, these are two guys that I don't like to use the word generational talent, but these are two guys that in 3 years from now, 4 years from now, could definitely be top 5 NFL draft picks. Maason is really special just because from our area, you don't see this kind of talent ever, or very seldom, especially in the last couple of years. I mean, you don't get a lot of 5 stars from the Bayou region. So they're both big names, big prospects. Maason, more so than Korey, would be a huge loss to LSU if they can't somehow reel him in.
And the idea of a package deal potentially, and the way they talk about they want to play together, package deal has become kind of this cliche phrase where as soon as you talk about two guys with a relationship, a fan wants to know, oh, are they a package deal? Are they both coming? And we've seen historically that works out less often than it probably does work out for two guys that have that relationship, but we've seen that history and we know that despite the relationship, they are, across the country from one another. How much stock do you put into that? Because it certainly means something, but trying to find the right, I guess, the right extent to consider that. Where do you land on some of that?
Yeah, these kind of things don't typically work out. You know that, I know that. Very seldom, if ever. But when you've got guys that are telling you this, and every time I talk to Maason, I ask just about every time, and I always say, I know you get tired of me asking, but I got to ask. And it's always the same. That's still their plan. Obviously, the virus and the shutdown, the dead parade, all of that's really kind of thrown a wrench into things as far as like, can he visit California? Can Korey visit Louisiana? Can they go on officials together to Oregon, to Georgia? So all of that you kind of have to factor in. But I am considering, like, I'm listening to what they're saying. If they're telling me that, it's something that they really want to try to do. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying, like, that's what they want to happen. They want to play together. They want to win national championships. They want to be developed. They want to be ready to go into the NFL. They want to play with other elite players. You're not going to check all of those boxes at every school. So I think, especially for Korey, he was committed to Clemson, so he must be okay with going to school across the country. But most everyone thinks that, he's going to stay home and pick USC. And I think that'll be the case if he cannot visit. I don't see Korey Foreman, the #1 player in the country, committing to LSU, signing with LSU without ever stepping foot on campus. I just don't see that happening. So I think these visits are going to be really important, whether it's an official and unofficial, whether it's just Korey coming down to Louisiana on his own dime and staying with Maason and his family, and the two of them taking a tour of LSU together. And again, I know that they really wanted to visit Oregon together, USC together, LSU together, and Georgia together. So to me, those are the 4 schools in play, but more so USC for Korey and LSU for Maason.
And I think it's worth reiterating. You've spent a ton of time covering Maason, and it's not always interview process. And so I think it's important for people to realize that as much of what we do and trying to get a read on some of these situations, there's what prospects will say, there's what prospects will say on record, and then there's just kind of that sense. And so beyond even some of the conversation, you have a really good sense of kind of the way they're saying it and what it really does mean to Maason to potentially play with Korey, and just kind of the intrigue that is there, beyond necessarily what quotes end up in a story.
Right. You think these are two of the top guys in the country. They developed this bond, this friendship. I would imagine that it's really hard for the average person to understand how tight they are. There's only a small group of recruits in this country that can understand what the other one is going through. That's something they bond over. They obviously bond over ball. And they're two guys they're from obviously California and Louisiana. They shouldn't be as tight as what they are, but it works for them. And so, not everything that I talk to Maason about is on the record or is quotes. A lot of the times I'm just there getting footage. For those that don't know, we're filming a documentary of sorts. I don't know if it's going to be a 1-part, 2-part, 3-part yet, but we're filming something with Maason for TigerDetails that's going to come out later this year, kind of just following him throughout his senior season. And if the senior year doesn't happen, then we're going to have to figure it out. Kind of thinking it might just be, how do you maintain your body, getting ready for college in a pandemic of sorts. So that's really why I'm there. But obviously I also still have, some other things that I want to talk to him about. And if anybody didn't see I was on ESPN radio the other day, and I kind of told the story about how I got them together. And it was basically after one of Maason's workouts that I was at, we just FaceTimed Korey on Maason's phone. And so I pulled out my phone recorder, so I'm sitting right here next to Maason, and, Korey's on FaceTime, and that's kind of how that worked out. Because, I mean, Korey's getting calls, texts, DMs, messages from every reporter you can imagine across the country, every college coach, analyst, this, that. So his phone's always blowing up. So there's a very few select people that he's going to pick up the phone for. And one of them just happens to be Maason Smith. So that's kind of how that worked out.
Yeah, I get really sick of my phone sometimes, and no one wants me to come play football anywhere. So I can only imagine what these guys go through some days. But with their different backgrounds, in my head, I always come back to kind of jokingly the old song, like he's a little bit country, he's a little bit rock and roll sort of thing with the Bayou guy and the Cali guy. But you mentioned the significance of particularly Maason in this class. They have half of the 16 recruits right now that are committed for the 2021 class are in that front seven. They've got big Anthony Hundley from South Florida in the middle of that defensive line, and then a ton of linebackers and edge rushers. And as much as we hear about key targets in other positions to kind of round out this class, we don't hear that much anymore about other guys in the front seven other than these two big names, because there is so much already on board. Beyond those two, do you see many people really kind of high on the priority list at the moment, or are these kind of some of the last pieces of something that has already been pretty heavily built in terms of a defensive front haul?
Well, I don't think LSU is going to stop recruiting some of these other guys, obviously. Just because it's recruiting and you never know. I mean, Mason's not a sure thing, and obviously Korey Foreman's not a sure thing. But I mean, the only other guys out there that you might hear of their names linked to LSU would be like Shamar Turner, who's the D-end out of Texas, or Bryce Langston, who's the D-end out of Florida. But really, either one of those guys, you don't really get the sense that they're leaning LSU. Langston, I want to say, is leaning towards Florida. And the last we heard, we think Shamar out in Texas might be leaning towards Alabama, but obviously none of that's certain because it's recruiting, and that could change tomorrow. So I think for LSU, the big one's definitely Maason. I know. LSU's big fish is Maason, and obviously if they can get Korey on board, that would be and that'd be incredible. It'd be an incredible haul. When you mentioned how many guys they already have on the line. And something I did want to mention was when I was talking to Korey, he said when he talks to LSU, he talks to Christian Lefouture and he talks to Coach O. But when they're pitching him, they're talking in the way that it would be a package deal. They're talking about him playing next to Maason on the line. So when they're talking to him about how they see him fitting in, it's him and Maason together. So, and I think in LSU's eyes, they know that if they land Maason, they have a better shot of potentially landing Korey.
And that would be a scary proposition for quarterbacks around the SEC, because the way this group has already come together for this 2021 recruiting class has already been pretty impressive. Obviously, we'll continue to monitor how it develops because we saw how many changes can occur late last year. And Julie, I'm looking forward to us chatting more about how those developments continue in that position group, as well as looking at some of these other positions in the weeks to come. But certainly appreciate you sharing some of that knowledge, because you've been as close to the recruiting class as anyone, and certainly Maason and the Maason and Korey situation and that defensive front seven just kind of crushing the game with the linebacker recruiting board.
Yeah. And, we talked about this off camera. We'll definitely try to do more things like this. Obviously, LSU has some other guys out there. There's potential of Nathaniel Wiggins, who's committing in late August, cornerback. There's JaQuincy McKinstry. There's a lot of guys that are still out there in play on the defensive side of the ball that are not on the D line. So maybe we'll talk about some of those guys next week.
Sounds good to me. Again, she's Julie Boudwin. I'm Jerit Roser for TigerDetails.com. Thanks.
Thanks.